Hey guys, tonight we drift gently back, not to the height of Roman glory, not to its thunderous conquests or marble-clad heroes, but to something far quieter. A Rome where the walls creak more than the crowds cheer, where the streets echo with the sound of sandals that have nowhere in particular to go. You're standing in the eternal city, but it's looking a little tired these days. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Post your location and local time in the comments below. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes and it's the year 400. Rome is still standing, technically, but the air feels heavy with memory. Cracks run through statues of long-forgotten emperors. Ivy creeps up the backs of once proud forums. The people still say Roma Eterna, eternal Rome, but there's a hesitation now, a slight cough after the phrase. The empire has grown tired. You wander through a forum that's mostly pigeons and echo now. The vendors have packed up early, the fountains still run, but just barely. There's no dramatic thunder, no flames licking the skyline, just the quiet exhaustion of an empire that's been holding itself together with string and optimism. Rome's army? Technically, it exists. You pass a group of half-drilled recruits outside the city, mostly farmers and mercenaries, many of them not even Roman. The legions that once marched with precision now sort of meander. Their shields clatter in a way that doesn't inspire much confidence. And the borders? Well, imagine a map where the edges are smudging and crumbling inward. The barbarians, those mysterious folks from the forests and plains, aren't just pushing at the borders anymore. They're inside the house, asking awkward questions like, "Where's your treasure?" and "Mind if we settle here?" Historians still argue whether Rome had already fallen by this point. Some say the rot began centuries earlier. Others insist it wasn't a fall at all, just a long nap with occasional looting breaks. You stroll past an old patrician mansion, now boarded up and silent. A once grand banquet hall holds nothing but dust and one chair that leans to the left. And yet, despite all this decay, life carries on. Children chase each other through the alleys. A baker still opens his stall every morning. His bread tastes a little more like ash these days, but it's warm. People still bathe in the public baths, though now the marble is chipped, and the steam is more memory than heat. You take a detour through the Curia, the Senate House. Inside, aged senators sit in a circle, debating things like the cost of olive oil or whether they should repaint the frescoes. One old man nods off mid-sentence. No one wakes him. The city's gods are still here too, sort of. Temples still stand, their columns eroded but upright. Priests mumble the old prayers, occasionally forgetting the words. Across town, a quiet group of Christians gathers by candlelight, whispering about eternity, while the empire around them quietly forgets what eternity used to mean. Farther out, in the countryside, villas lie abandoned. Roads that once carried legions are overgrown with weeds. A trader trudges along the Via Appia, cart squeaking, hoping the next town still has someone left to sell to. And through all of this, there's a strange, constant denial. The people don't panic. They don't scream that Rome is falling. They shrug, patch another hole in the roof, and tell themselves it's just a rough decade. Maybe two. Even the statues seem tired. You pass one of Marcus Aurelius, his bronze hand forever raised, now covered in bird droppings. He looks less like a philosopher king and more like a man trying to ask where everyone went. There's no single collapse, no sudden bang. Just the gentle, eerie sensation that something great is ending. Not loudly, but slowly, patiently, like a candle that flickers lower and lower, but never quite goes out. Not yet. A chill breeze drifts down a cracked marble corridor. You pull your cloak tighter and keep walking. You trudge along the outskirts of Rome now, past crumbling aqueducts and half-forgotten tombs. The city's walls rise before you, not quite crumbling, but definitely porous. Birds nest in the gaps between the stones. Weeds have claimed the base. Still, they stand tall, at least for now. Beyond those walls, out in the misty reaches of Italy and even farther beyond the Alps, there's a different kind of movement. Not the sharp drumbeat of Roman legions, but the slower, heavier tread of entire peoples on the move. Wagons creak, oxen groan, and somewhere in the fog, the distinct sound of Gothic boots scraping through mud. The Visigoths. You've probably heard the name. Sounds dramatic, doesn't it? Visigoths. Like they should be covered in war paint and shouting at the sky. But the truth? They're tired too. They've been wandering for decades, pushed, betrayed, underpaid, occasionally starved, and always looking for a place to settle. They didn't want to burn Rome to the ground. Not really. They just wanted a seat at the table, a homeland, maybe a little dignity. You pass a small Roman farm where the locals have started boarding up their windows. No one knows exactly when or where the Goths will show up next, but everyone knows it's inevitable. Alaric, the Visigoth king, is leading them. You haven't met him yet. We'll get there. But his footsteps echo ahead of him. His people are gathering. Some have spears, some have sacks. Most have children in tow. This isn't just a war band, it's a migrating nation with a grudge. You stop for a moment beside a dusty milestone on the road. It marks the distance to Rome, 112 miles. Underneath it, someone scratched a second message. They're coming. The letters are jagged, like they were carved in a hurry, or with cold hands. Historians still argue whether the Visigoths were truly invaders. After all, they'd been foederati, official allies of Rome, invited in across the Danube decades earlier. You can almost imagine the awkward Roman official handing them the deal, thinking, what's the worst that could happen? Well, the worst is unfolding, slowly and politely, one diplomatic failure at a time. As you follow the road, you pass caravans, half-starved Gothic families pushing rickety carts. The wheels creak like old bones. An old woman murmurs a prayer in a tongue you don't understand. A child looks up at you with hollow eyes, then moves on. They're not wild barbarians. They're cold, hungry, and done waiting. You duck into a Roman outpost at the edge of Latium. The garrison is mostly still there. A few soldiers warm their hands over a fire, joking about promotions that will never come. One of them is barely 17. His helmet's too big. He's writing a letter home. No one stops him. Inside the outpost, you find a scroll posted on the wall, an urgent request for reinforcements. It's dated 8 months ago. The thing is, Rome's still pretending it has control, still drawing maps, still issuing decrees, but the messengers are too slow, the generals too distracted, the treasury mostly missing. Somewhere an accountant is trying to figure out where all the gold went, while a goat chews his ledger. You take a moment to watch the horizon. The sun is setting. Orange light filters through distant smoke, probably a farmhouse burning, or maybe someone just forgot the stew again. You can't tell. A Roman courier rides past at a gallop, shouting something about a meeting, or a promise, or a betrayal. You didn't catch it. His words trail off behind him like so many imperial declarations, loud, urgent, quickly forgotten. You step off the road and let the Gothic procession pass. They move like ghosts, quiet, determined, in no particular hurry. One man pulls a small handcart with a broken wheel. A young woman carries a bag of seed over one shoulder and a sword on the other. A toddler sleeps in the crook of an old warrior's arm. And in the middle of it all, somewhere behind a thick, battered cloak, rides Alaric. You can't see his face yet, but the silence around him is heavy, as if even the trees are holding their breath. There's no thunder, no charge, no screaming, just footsteps. Lots and lots of footsteps. And Rome, still asleep. Still convincing itself that the walls are strong, the gods are watching, and the empire has plenty of time to respond. Maybe tomorrow. You pull your cloak tighter again. The wind's picked up. A scroll flutters by, unclaimed, its wax seal cracked. You don't bother picking it up. You already know what it says. Request denied. You finally catch up to the man you've been hearing about, Alaric. And honestly, he doesn't look how you expected. No wild eyes, no blood-soaked sword. Just a tall, quiet figure in a battered cloak, sitting atop a sturdy horse that looks just as tired as everything else in this story. He's not yelling. He's not rallying the troops with fiery speeches. He's reading a scroll, nodding slightly, like he's trying to decide whether to draft another letter or just throw this one on the pile. This is Alaric, the reluctant invader, the barbarian with better handwriting than most Roman senators. His beard is neatly trimmed, his eyes sharp, his armor polished, but worn, not flashy. He doesn't want to burn Rome. He just wants what was promised. You walk beside his horse as he quietly confers with one of his commanders. No shouting, no fanfare. Just the calm logistics of someone who's been knocking on the front door for too long and is starting to wonder whether the owners are even home. See, Alaric's not new to Rome. He served in the Roman military, fought in Roman campaigns, studied Roman tactics. He even tried the whole "let's be friends" thing. Rome responded with a shrug, or worse, bureaucratic silence. Historians still argue whether Alaric ever intended to sack Rome at all. Some say it was always his endgame. Others believe he was driven to it by sheer frustration, like a customer waiting 20 years for their refund. You listen as he mutters about broken treaties, unpaid troops, and emperors who won't return his calls. Relatable, really. You pass a Visigoth camp being set up outside a Roman town. No chaos, no pillaging, just people settling down, boiling water, mending shoes. One man is even playing a reed flute while roasting something vaguely bird-shaped over the fire. A girl is braiding her doll's hair beside him. Inside one of the tents, maps are spread out across a crate. Alaric traces a line from the northern plains to the outskirts of Rome. It's not a dramatic slash. It's more like a suggestion, a tired sigh in cartographic form. You overhear a conversation about negotiations. Again, apparently Alaric has sent yet another envoy to Emperor Honorius. He's offered peace terms. Again. It's like watching someone knock politely on a door for the 38th time, holding flowers and a list of reasonable demands, while the curtains inside rustle but no one answers. Honorius, by the way, isn't in Rome. He's in Ravenna, a swampy, hard-to-reach coastal city with great defense and almost zero charm. Rome's emperor has retreated there, behind thick walls and thicker denial. You can almost hear him saying, "If I ignore the problem, maybe it will march away." Back in the Visigoth camp, Alaric is finishing his dinner, stew and stale bread, same as his men. You're surprised he eats with them, no gold plate or velvet tent. Just a man with tired eyes and a very long to-do list. One of his officers approaches and hands him a freshly written letter from Ravenna. Alaric reads it, sighs, and folds it very carefully before placing it in the fire. That's probably the 5th one today. You walk with him later under a quiet sky, stars above, soft wind. Even the war horses are dozing. Alaric tells a nearby guard to sharpen his spear, not because he's planning to fight, but just in case. See, this isn't a war in the usual sense. It's more like a very tense real estate negotiation where one side is armed and the other keeps pretending the mailbox doesn't exist. And as the night deepens, you feel it. This quiet, slow-building frustration. Not rage, not bloodlust. Just the deep, gnawing weariness of someone who's tried every peaceful option and is running out of patience. You wonder, how much longer can he wait? Not long, apparently. A messenger returns from Ravenna again. Alaric listens, eyes closed, then simply nods. He says nothing, but the others around him stir. A new mood is in the air. Not anger, just decision. The Visigoths begin to move, slowly, quietly, like fog rolling downhill. And you realize he didn't want to sack Rome, but he will. You step softly now through the marbled halls of Rome, not with awe, but with the kind of caution one uses in an old house that creaks with every step. The Senate is in session, technically. A few dozen men in togas are gathered under a domed ceiling, so cracked it resembles a spider web. The only thing louder than their whispers is the echo of their indecision. Welcome to the political heart of the Western Roman Empire, if you can call it that. The Senate of Rome, once the beating core of a civilization that ruled continents, now feels more like a social club for men afraid of being held responsible for anything. You find a seat in the back, Near a statue of Cicero whose nose has been chipped off, a pigeon watches you from the folds of his toga. The debate today? Whether to allocate funds for grain relief or repaint the fresco in the entrance hall. One senator insists the fresco would boost morale. Another mumbles something about barbarians at the gates, gets laughed at, and goes back to chewing olives. You glance down at the floor. It's still made of imported marble, still polished, sort of. But it's also cracked in 3 different places. No one mentions it. The emperor, Honorius, is, unsurprisingly, not present. He hasn't been in Rome for years. He sends letters instead. You see one being read aloud. It includes something about divine favor, something about patience, and an oddly specific comment about poultry health. That last part makes sense later. Historians still argue whether the Senate had any real power at this point. By now, most of the decisions came from the imperial court in Ravenna, or more accurately, from whichever advisor Honorius happened to be listening to that week. The Senate? Mostly ceremonial, like a wax fruit bowl, technically still on the table, but not doing much. You wander through a corridor after the meeting ends. Senators shuffle past, arguing softly about theater schedules and wool prices. One is asleep on a bench. Another fiddles nervously with a ring that no longer fits. They speak Latin, but their tone feels painfully modern. Lots of polite panic, no real solutions. In a side room, you spot a dusty stack of scrolls labeled emergency measures. They're unopened. Someone mentions Alaric's name. The room goes quiet for a moment, then someone coughs and changes the subject to the weather. Outside in the Forum, the mood isn't much better. Citizens gather in loose clusters, a few former soldiers, a few farmers from the outlying estates, even a priest who looks like he hasn't slept since Easter. They murmur about rumors, about Gothic troops nearby, about missing supply trains, about temples looted just a few towns over. You see a merchant selling protective amulets carved from old wine corks. They're going fast. Meanwhile, the city's defenses are in questionable shape. You pass along the Aurelian Wall. It's still standing, sure, but the last time it was properly reinforced, Julius Caesar hadn't even been born. Moss covers the towers. A guard lounges in the shade, half asleep with a rusty spear across his lap. Inside a nearby watchtower, you find 2 young men playing dice on a map of Italy. One of them casually uses Alaric's name as a punchline. The other shrugs and wins the game with a bored expression. Back in the Senate district, you come across a strange moment. A group of children chasing a half-deflated ball down a corridor lined with statues of dead emperors. The children shout joyfully. The statues remain silent. It's the loudest life you've heard in hours. And through all of this, the most surreal thing? Rome still feels normal. Sort of. The bread stalls are open. Street musicians play reed flutes for coin. A woman hangs fresh laundry from a 3rd-story window. The city's routines haven't stopped. They've just slowed. You feel it in your bones. A kind of civic inertia, a long nap taken in denial. The Visigoths are out there. Everyone knows it, but pretending they aren't seems easier, for now. So the Senate continues to debate. The temples still ring faintly with prayer, and the marble hallways stay polished just enough to reflect the flicker of torchlight. Rome hasn't fallen yet, but it has definitely started reclining. You wake up, or maybe you never really slept, as another emperor disappears. Yes, another one. In this chapter of slow-moving chaos, the emperors of the Western Roman Empire come and go like guests at a very awkward dinner party. Some rule for years, some for months, 1 or 2 possibly for the length of a warm bath. You can barely keep track. Honestly, no one else can either. As you stroll down a corridor in the Imperial Records Office, located in a dusty villa somewhere between ceremonial and forgotten, you pass a line of busts meant to honor the Western emperors. Half are broken. One has a wine stain. A confused clerk is trying to remember who comes after Avitus but before Majorian. He gets it wrong, shrugs, and goes back to copying a list of unpaid military invoices. You pause to consider how odd it is that the man technically ruling half of the known world can be so forgettable. But here we are. At this point in the early 5th century, emperors are rarely chosen for their brilliance or charisma. Instead, they're appointed by generals, bribed into place, or plucked from aristocratic families like mildly wilted fruit. Their job? Sit on the throne, wear the robe, and hopefully not die until the paperwork is finished. One of these was a man named Priscus Attalus, once a Roman senator and philosopher, sensible, educated, and entirely unequipped to lead an empire in freefall. The Visigoths, of all people, propped him up as a puppet emperor for a while. That's right, a barbarian-sponsored emperor in the city of Rome, sort of like your neighbor's dog suddenly deciding who gets to be mayor. Historians still argue whether Attalus genuinely tried to reform anything, or if he was just too stunned by the whole situation to act. Either way, it didn't work out. He was deposed, reinstated, and deposed again, like a particularly unpopular theater understudy. You sit for a while in the corner of an abandoned audience chamber, watching as a servant polishes a throne no one's used in weeks. Dust dances in the afternoon light. A guard naps by the door. Somewhere down the hall, someone is arguing about which emperor's birthday it is today. Meanwhile, the man who should be leading, Honorius, is still tucked away safely in Ravenna. He's not exactly known for decisive action, or charisma, or much of anything, really. The most famous anecdote about him? When told that Rome had perished, he reportedly gasped, until he realized they meant the city, not his pet chicken named Roma. Then he relaxed and said, "Oh, that's a relief." Yes, that happened. Probably. Maybe. Historians are still debating whether it was satire or a metaphor, but either way, it's disturbingly on brand. You stroll through a dusty military office and find a stack of unopened letters from provincial governors begging for aid. Some of them are months old. Some are addressed to emperors who aren't alive anymore. The Roman military, once an unstoppable force of precision and strength, is now more of a franchise operation. Underfunded, understaffed, and often outsourced to the very barbarian groups causing problems. It's like hiring the guy breaking into your house to also fix your locks. You pass a barracks where a group of half-trained recruits try to remember which end of the spear goes where. Their armor doesn't match. Their commander left 2 weeks ago and hasn't come back. Morale? Let's not ask. There's a general malaise drifting through the corridors of power. Everyone is tired, not in a "we've been at war for weeks" kind of way, but in a "we've been avoiding responsibility for decades" kind of way. Even the scribes are writing more slowly. You sit beside one as he copies out a new proclamation from the emperor. Probably written by a board official and signed during a yawn. It declares that peace is imminent. Supplies will be arriving soon. The emperor is in control. You both chuckle, quietly. Then he returns to copying, this time in slightly larger letters, just to fill the space. You pass another bust in the hallway. No name, just a plinth that reads Imperator Temporarius, temporary emperor. You're not sure if it's a joke or just brutally honest. By the end of the day, another messenger arrives. Another emperor has been named somewhere, possibly in Gaul, possibly with the support of 1 legion and a donkey. He won't last the month. No one seems surprised. Rome, it seems, is not being led anymore. It's just being handed off like a slightly dented heirloom no one wants to throw away. Night has fallen over Rome, but the city doesn't sleep. Not peacefully anyway. You walk its streets as lamps flicker uncertainly, casting long, nervous shadows across mosaics that haven't been cleaned in years. Somewhere in the distance, a dog howls. Or maybe it's just your imagination. There's a different kind of fear in the air now. Not the sharp, dramatic kind. This is a slow, seeping dread, like water rising in a locked room. People still go about their business, but they keep one eye on the city gates and the other on the sky, as if waiting for a sign or a warning. And then it happens. It starts with a murmur, first among the guards, then the traders, then the clergy. The Visigoths are at the gates. Alaric has returned, not with a parade, not with war drums, but with cold, terrifying silence. You make your way to the walls, now lit with torches and the occasional panicked soldier. They're trying to look brave, but it's not going well. You overhear one young guard ask, "Do we even have a plan?" The answer's a shrug. Alaric has surrounded the city, not like a lion pouncing, but like a fog curling in from the hills. Roads are cut off, supply lines choked. Messenger birds. Well, you can't block birds, but no one seems to be reading their notes anyway. Inside Rome, the panic rises by the hour. You pass a wealthy senator's home being hastily boarded up. Inside, servants pack silver into sacks. The senator himself is arguing with a carpenter about whether wood panels can stop a siege. Spoiler, they cannot. The city tries to mount a defense. Keys are distributed. A curfew is announced. Priests increase the incense budget. A general, whose name escapes everyone, declares confidently that help is coming. From where? He doesn't say. Historians still argue whether this was a true siege or more of a long, cold shoulder from outside. Either way, it works. Rome, dependent on the outside world for its food, begins to starve. Slowly, cruelly. You walk past a bakery that hasn't had flour in 3 days. The owner sits outside, staring at a bag of breadcrumbs like it's a winning lottery ticket. A small boy offers you a coin for a dried fig. You don't have one. The Tiber, once Rome's great artery of trade, flows quietly beneath its bridges. Barges no longer arrive. The docks are empty. A single fish flops in the shallows, and 3 fishermen dive for it like it's gold. And through all of this, no one helps. Not Honorius, not Ravenna. The rest of the empire, what's left of it, stays silent. Rome is on its own. In desperation, the city sends ambassadors to Alaric. You trail behind them, cloaked and silent, as they exit through a side gate under truce. They are tired, thin, and far too hopeful. When they return, their faces are pale. Alaric, it turns out, wants something reasonable. Land for his people, food, payment for years of service, recognition. Things Rome has promised and never delivered, but the Senate refuses. Too proud, too deluded, too scared to be the generation that gave in. And so the siege drags on. You pass makeshift soup lines where the soup is mostly water and disappointment. People boil leather sandals for flavor. Dogs disappear. Then cats. Then, well, you stop asking. You find yourself at a church one evening, packed full of citizens praying with a desperation that smells of sweat and incense. A bishop speaks of divine protection. A woman in the back faints from hunger. No one notices. By week 3, rumors swirl like ash in the wind that Alaric's forces will spare churches, that they'll take hostages, that the emperor in Ravenna is actually dead, that the Tiber is cursed, that Jupiter has abandoned Rome, that maybe he never existed. You sit beside a statue of Romulus, the mythical founder of the city. He stares forward, stone eyes unblinking, as if asking, "Really? This is where we ended up?" Outside the gates, the Visigoths wait, patient, steady. Fires dot the horizon like quiet warnings. They're not attacking, not yet. But the silence is deafening. You realize slowly what everyone in Rome is starting to understand. The sack isn't coming tomorrow. It's already begun. You wake to silence. Not peace, not relief. Just that strange, hollow hush. The kind that comes before something breaks. Rome's walls still stand, but the people inside are thinner, quieter, and quicker to stare at nothing for long stretches of time. The fountains still trickle, barely. Statues of gods still tower above empty plazas. But even the pigeons seem nervous now. The Senate meets less often. The bakeries don't open at all. The city has entered what you might call existential standby mode. And then, as if pulled by gravity, All attention turns back to Alaric. You follow a narrow procession through the southern gate. Not soldiers this time, but diplomats again. They're trying one last time. Alaric has made his demands clear. Land for his people, gold for his men, respect for his authority. Rome responds with more stalling, more titles, more empty gestures. One senator reportedly offers Alaric an honorary military rank and a decorative vase. He does not take it well. Historians still argue whether this was Rome's final mistake, or just the latest in a series of bad choices dressed in nice togas. You return to the forum. It's emptier than usual. A child plays with a stick in the dust where market stalls once stood. An old woman mutters to a faded mural of Mars. A man tries to sell goth-proof charms carved from roof tiles. And then one evening, the gates open. No battle, no rams, no siege towers. Someone, maybe a traitor, maybe a starving gatekeeper, maybe a ghost, unlocks the Salarian gate. Just opens it. You are there. You see the hinges move. You hear the wind catch the rusted iron. And then you see them. The Visigoths don't rush in screaming. They walk in, calm, purposeful, hungry, determined. Not like an invading army. More like a tide that's been waiting far too long. You move with the crowd as chaos unfolds, quiet at first, then louder. Shops are torn open. Villas are ransacked. Gold is seized. Statues are toppled. Paintings sliced from their frames. But it's not complete destruction. The sack of Rome in 410 is not what you expect. There's no firestorm, no rivers of blood. It's more surgical than savage, except when it isn't. You pass a basilica turned shelter where Alaric has posted guards. His men protect it. Some places are sacred. He keeps his word for the most part. Churches are spared. Priests are ignored. The poor are mostly left alone. But others aren't so lucky. A senator's house burns near the Palatine Hill. His personal wine cellar explodes with a spectacular crash. Down the street, someone is dragging a golden candelabra taller than himself. Two Visigoths argue over whether a marble bust is worth carrying. You dodge a donkey pulling a wagon filled with stolen scrolls. Ancient knowledge headed who knows where. A boy runs past holding a Roman general's helmet 3 sizes too large. He laughs like it's a toy. You can't tell if he's Gothic or Roman. Does it matter anymore? At one corner, a man sells looted trinkets from a blanket. Half price if you don't ask where it came from. He jokes. No one laughs. The city moans. Not screams, not yells. It's a slow, aching sound, like a statue finally cracking under its own weight. Alaric, you learn, is not taking up residence. He doesn't want to rule Rome. He wants to send a message. He wants to move on. But before he goes, he makes sure the empire hears this sack loud and clear. 3 days. That's how long it lasts. 3 surreal days in which the eternal city is humbled, not by fire, not by plague, but by a people who wanted a home and got tired of asking nicely. And then, just like that, they're gone. You walk the streets afterward. Smoke curls from broken roofs. A few skeletons of buildings stand stripped but upright. The forum is eerily quiet, save for the crows. You sit by a dry fountain and run your hand along the stone. Rome is still here, but it isn't Rome anymore. The Visigoths have left, just like that. No banners waving in triumph, no parting speeches, no graffiti scratched onto marble walls. They came, they took, they left. Rome, still standing, feels strangely lighter, as if some enormous, invisible weight has been lifted, but also as if something essential is missing. You step through the ghostly quiet of the forum, where wind stirs scraps of parchment and a few toppled benches lie at odd angles. The columns are still there. The gods, carved into pediments above, still stare blankly down. But the energy is gone. Something vital has slipped away while no one was looking. In the days after the sack, Romans do what humans always do after trauma. They try to make sense of it. The Senate, those who weren't robbed blind, gathers again. Fewer chairs are filled. One senator is wearing mismatched sandals. Another insists on conducting the meeting in Greek, for reasons unclear. The mood? defensive denial. You hear things like, "It wasn't a real sack," or "We allowed them in as guests," or even, "This will make us stronger in the long run." A classic Roman cocktail of optimism and delusion. But outside on the streets, reality tells a different story. The aqueducts are partially damaged. Some neighborhoods have no clean water. Markets reopen slowly, cautiously, as if waiting for the sky to fall again. Children play with broken spears. A few burned villas are being quietly looted by their own former servants. You pass by a public bathhouse. The steam has stopped. The tiles are cracked. One attendant tries to polish a marble statue, as if making it shine again will bring back the crowd. Historians still argue whether this sack was truly catastrophic. On paper, Rome survived. The city wasn't razed, and the majority of its buildings still stand. Churches were largely untouched. The political structure limped on. But you can feel it in the bones of the place. This was not just a physical blow, it was spiritual. Rome, the city believed to be eternal, had been violated, entered, taken, and that illusion of invincibility, that story it had told itself for centuries, cracked right down the middle. People speak in hushed tones now. You walk through neighborhoods where families once held feasts, and now they sit quietly, stirring thin porridge over small fires. Even the birds are quieter. Even the dogs look unsure. You pass a monk scribbling furiously in a candlelit chamber. His manuscript is a mixture of sorrow and theology. The sack he writes is punishment, or prophecy, or both. His ink runs dry halfway through a sentence, and he just sighs. One priest, more practical than poetic, starts collecting relics into a large sack, muttering that they should probably be moved somewhere less sackable. His assistant is already packing silver chalices in straw. News spreads slowly to the rest of the empire. You sit with a group of travelers from Gaul who only just heard the news from a passing merchant. One drops his wine cup in shock. Another asks, "But wasn't Rome impossible to sack?" And yet here we are. Emperor Honorius in Ravenna sends a letter of consolation. It is underwhelming. He speaks of the need for faith and a new era of vigilance. His words don't reach Rome for several days, by which time many have already used his earlier letters to light fires or plug drafty windows. You stand by the Salarian Gate, the very entrance used by the Visigoths, and watch as it swings slightly in the breeze. No one has fixed it. No one seems to want to touch it, like a cursed object. Some say Rome will recover, others aren't so sure. You wander into a small school where a handful of children read from scrolls that are missing half their pages. The teacher corrects one student's Latin and sighs. "It's not what it was, you know." He means the language, but also everything. A woman passes you on the street, carrying a loaf of bread, wrapped in what used to be a senator's silk tunic. Resourceful. And in the far corner of the city, near a crumbling section of wall, you spot something strange. A small group of artisans repairing a broken statue. Not a famous one, just a minor river god, half forgotten. They're using mismatched marble and glue made from boiled hooves. It's not elegant, but it's something. And maybe that's the point. Rome won't fall in a day, but it's starting to learn how to live after being broken. Morning sunlight filters through the cracked rooftops and shattered tiles of Rome like a soft apology. You walk slowly through the streets, now familiar in their damage. This isn't the aftermath of a storm. It's the stillness after a reckoning. Rome is not destroyed, but Rome has changed. You pass a gathering of townspeople in what used to be a basilica courtyard. They're not praying, they're listening. A local noble, once irrelevant, now oddly important, stands on a makeshift platform, reading from a scroll. He's proposing a community defense league, a bucket brigade, some kind of repair rota. He fumbles through the details, but no one interrupts. Because at this point, any action feels like a revolution. The crowd disperses. You watch them return to their routines, patching walls, repairing carts, cleaning ash from statues with strips of old cloth. It's not efficient. It's not elegant. But it is motion. Historians still debate whether this moment, the weeks after the sack, was the beginning of Rome's recovery or simply its new baseline of decline. You, standing here among broken fountains and nervous dogs, suspect it's both. You follow the scent of bread, not fresh but warm. A baker has reopened with what little flour remains. His loaves are half the size they used to be. No one complains. Someone trades him a candlestick for a roll. It's a good deal. At the edges of the city, the countryside is beginning to seep inward. Farmers and shepherds drift in with news and food and questions. You overhear one ask, "Is the emperor still alive?" The answer's a shrug. Back in Ravenna, Honorius continues to do very little. He holds meetings, sends letters, issues edicts about dress codes and tax schedules. But here in Rome, his words arrive like leaves drifting across a battlefield. Still, some people cling to the idea of the empire. You visit a school where the teacher begins the day's lesson with "Rome is eternal," though her voice wavers. The students nod because they don't know what else to do. You pass a retired legionary showing neighborhood boys how to hold a sword. Not that they have swords, they're using broom handles. He barks instructions in a voice half lost to time, half fueled by nostalgia. Nearby, a young woman is repainting a shrine. Not because she thinks the gods will fix anything, but because she wants her children to remember the city wasn't always broken. The Forum remains a strange place, still filled with statues, still echoing with the ghosts of speeches. But now it also holds quiet conversations in corners, whispered plans, and someone selling boiled onions for 3 coins a bulb. And through all of it, one name lingers like a chill: Alaric. You hear it in taverns, on the lips of senators in muttered prayers. Some curse him, some begrudgingly admire him. A few suggest he was a tool of divine punishment. One man insists Alaric was never real, that he was a spirit sent by the gods to humble Rome. He was real. You remember his eyes, calm, piercing, tired. But here's the twist. Not long after the sack, Alaric dies. Yes, just like that. Historians still argue about the cause. Fever, poison, the burden of having touched the untouchable city. Whatever it was, he dies not long after marching south, intending to cross into Africa. His body, legend says, is buried beneath a riverbed. His men diverted the stream, dug his grave, and let the water flow back over him. Then, to protect the secret, they killed every laborer who helped. You stand on a bridge later that week, staring into the Tiber. It's not the same river, but the current speaks the same language. You wonder how many stories lie beneath the surface, unmarked, unnamed, forgotten. Back in Rome, the recovery limps on. No great rebuilding effort, no massive imperial relief, just people, tired, proud, clever people, patching holes, mending temples, stitching together a future out of whatever scraps they still have. Rome, you realize, is doing what it has always done best, surviving, not gloriously, not cleanly, but stubbornly. Because even after the gold is taken, even after the marble is cracked, even after the gates are open from within, the soul of the city, however bruised, refuses to flicker out. You wander Rome as the days stretch out, each one quieter than the last, but never still. The sack is over, but its echoes are everywhere, etched into broken statues, whispered between neighbors, baked into the city's very dust. And yet Rome continues. The eternal city now feels more like the resilient city, less a beacon of power, more an aging giant adjusting its bones to stand upright again. You pause at a once grand villa, now occupied by squatters. A family of former servants now sleeps in the atrium, cooking lentils over a fire pit dug into the mosaic floor. The father offers you a cup of something warm and thin. You accept it gratefully. It tastes like bitter herbs and borrowed time. Later in the forum, a street preacher draws a small crowd by claiming the sack of Rome was not a punishment, but a purification. He says the old gods have failed, and that only divine truth can rebuild the city. People nod, not because they agree, but because they need someone, anyone, to sound sure of something. You pass a man chiseling the face off a public statue. "Wrong emperor," he mutters. You don't ask which one, because by now emperors are background noise. Honorius is still alive in Ravenna, still issuing edicts, still surrounded by advisors more interested in maintaining court etiquette than saving the empire. You picture him carefully arranging scrolls on a polished table while Rome burns in memory. Historians still debate whether he ever truly grasped the scale of what had happened. Some say he never visited Rome again. Others say he sent a wreath and a vague note. You pass by the Salarian Gate again. It's been hastily reinforced with new wood and iron, though no one seems convinced it'll hold next time. A guard dozes on a stool, his helmet tilted over his eyes. Next to the gate, someone's hung a handmade sign. It reads simply, "Still here." It might as well be Rome's new motto. You sit by a crumbling fountain and trace your finger through the algae that now coats the stone. Across the plaza, two women are rebuilding a market stall with salvaged wood and broken cartwheels. Nearby, a boy sketches birds into the dust with a charred stick. Life, persistent and unimpressed by history, insists on continuing. Not far from there, in a garden overtaken by weeds, an aging senator reads aloud from Virgil. His audience? One cat, 3 pigeons, and a young girl who may or may not be listening. He speaks the lines with reverence, as if they hold power, as if the city's soul still pulses in the rhythm of ancient verse. You move on, past houses that echo with emptiness, temples where prayers are muttered more out of habit than faith, and streets where the only sound is the soft shuffle of worn sandals on stone. And you wonder, what now? There are whispers that the capital might move again, that Ravenna is safer, more defensible, that Rome is simply too symbolic and therefore too vulnerable. The idea stings, but people don't argue. They're too tired to care where the paperwork is signed, as long as the bread arrives on time. You overhear merchants discussing the Visigoths, who have moved south, still seeking passage into Africa. Some say they're being hunted now, others claim they're already gone. But the city doesn't talk about revenge, just weather and repairs and when the next shipment of grain might arrive. And maybe that's the greatest change. Rome, once the thunderous center of a world-spanning empire, no longer seems interested in thundering. It is recovering like an old man after a fall, with quiet dignity, occasional muttering, and deep unspoken pain. Even the architecture seems unsure of itself. New buildings are smaller, plainer. Columns are reused from old ruins. Doors don't quite fit their frames. You enter a church converted from a bathhouse, where the echoes of laughter still cling to the marble. But in a corner, you see something new, a painting of Christ, soft and golden, surrounded by cracked plaster and burnt candle wax. Below it, a woman kneels with her child, whispering a prayer half in Latin, half in longing. Faith has shifted too. Where once Jupiter and Mars guarded the city, now a quiet carpenter's son from Galilee watches over its ruins. His image is on the rise, not just in Rome, but across the crumbling empire. Not a god of war, a god of suffering, of endurance, of rebuilding. You step outside as the bells ring, faint, cracked, but still calling. Some people answer, some don't. But the sound carries softly through the city. As summer deepens, the air in Rome grows thick with dust and dry olive leaves. You move through the city slowly now, partly because the roads are littered with rubble, and partly because everyone seems to walk more slowly these days. Not out of laziness, out of reverence, like they're afraid to step too hard on history's bruises. You find yourself near the old Curia, where senators once thundered policies into being with the force of empires behind their words. Now the doors are stuck half open, and pigeons roost in the rafters. A lone scribe sits on the steps, copying fragments of a speech by Cicero onto reused parchment. He glances up at you. Just in case, he says, for whoever comes next. You nod, because that's the thing now. Everything in Rome is done just in case. Just in case the empire pulls itself together. Just in case another army comes. Just in case this isn't the end. But some are starting to say it is. You wander to the outskirts, where farmland once supplied the city's markets with grain and olives and wine. Now it's dotted with refugee camps, makeshift tents and cooking fires, wagons turned sideways for shade. Displaced families from across Italy huddle here, drawn to Rome not because it's strong, but because it's still standing. A farmer shows you his field, now overrun with weeds and Gothic horseshoe prints. He shrugs and says, "The land still grows," but it doesn't listen anymore. Historians still argue whether the sack of Rome in 410 was the fall or just a fracture. Some point to the survival of institutions, the continuity of the church, the eventual reign of other emperors. Others point to the psychological damage, the way the idea of Rome cracked open and bled out across the known world. You stop by a trader's stall. He's selling coins stamped with Honorius's face. "Souvenirs," he grins. "From the emperor who slept through a sack." You raise an eyebrow. He adds, "Don't worry, half price if you pretend he didn't." The people of Rome, it turns out, still have their humor. Dry, bitter, laced with memory, but intact. You duck into a small library tucked beneath a church, one of those quiet places where scrolls go to nap. A young woman catalogs them, her hands stained with ink, her eyes fierce. "We lost many," she says, "but not all." She gestures to a stack. "Help me carry these. We'll hide them better this time." You do. And as you carry those ancient, flaking scrolls down into a dry cellar, you realize this too is resistance. Not in the form of swords or speeches, but in the form of memory, of preservation, of refusing to forget who Rome was, even as it tries to figure out who it might still become. Later, on a rooftop near the Aventine Hill, you watch the sun set over the city. The rooftops glow orange. Columns cast long, wobbly shadows over cracked marble. A bell rings in the distance. A dog barks twice. Then silence. And then singing. Soft, low, human singing. You lean forward and spot a group of women in a courtyard, hanging linens, humming a hymn that probably predates even the sack. They sing not because everything is fine, but because it isn't. And that's when music matters most. Down in the alley, a child is drawing a picture in charcoal on a wall. It's not great art, just a house, a sun, a stick figure family. But the roof has flowers on it, and the family is smiling. You smile too, because that roof hasn't existed in months. But the child remembers it and draws it back into the world. Hope in Rome now comes in small forms, not in armies or declarations, but in loaves of bread traded for song, in scrolls dusted off and hidden away, in paintings of saints beside faded murals of Mars, in one more arch cleaned, one more brick placed, one more fig tree watered. Rome, once a titan, now survives like a gardener in a drought, patient, quiet, stubborn. You look down at the cobblestones beneath your feet, worn smooth by 1,000 years of sandals, wheels, and hoofbeats, and you whisper, "Still here." Not because it's brave, but because it's true. It's autumn now, and Rome wears it like a second skin. Warm ochres in the dust, sun-washed amber on the stone, dried grape leaves curling along the walls of old villas. The days are shorter, the shadows are longer, and yet the city breathes a little more easily. You wake to the sound of cartwheels creaking over cobblestones. A merchant is hauling fresh figs from the outskirts, singing a song about a goat that tricked a tax collector. A few children join the chorus, laughing. Somehow this moment feels more Roman than any triumphal parade. Not everything is better, but not everything is worse. You pass a forum where, of all things, a wedding is taking place. Not in marble splendor, but on the remains of a mosaic floor. Two families, one Roman, one of Gothic descent, gather awkwardly under a canopy of faded banners. The bride laughs too loud. The groom trips over his own sandal. Someone drops a ring. And yet the cheers are real. Rome's new normal isn't grand. It's messy, patched together, and full of contradictions. You see monks helping to rebuild a collapsed aqueduct while arguing about heresy. You see beggars quoting Horace. You see a retired gladiator teaching grammar in exchange for bread. Even the Senate still functions, technically. You attend a session. The room smells of mildew and ancient perfume. The senators argue about taxes and road repairs, occasionally throwing in a "when the empire was great" for old time's sake. You suspect at least two of them are asleep with their eyes open. And yet even this routine, this bureaucratic sleepwalk, has meaning. They haven't given up. They're still pretending Rome is in charge. And that pretense holds the walls up just a little longer. You stop at a small shrine on the Aventine. It's been repainted in bright reds and yellows. Offerings of fruit, bread, and little clay figurines crowd its base. One child leaves a smooth rock. Another leaves a broken coin. Historians still argue whether this was superstition or community therapy. You decide it's both. Later, you find yourself in the old baths of Diocletian, not bathing, they haven't worked in years, but walking. The echo of your footsteps travels farther than it used to. The vaulted ceilings still impress, cracked though they are. A group of elderly citizens plays a slow game of dice near a half-fallen column. They don't speak much, but they're together, and that, in this Rome, counts as defiance. You sit for a time by the Tiber. The water runs slower than usual, low from the dry summer. A fisherman tells you the river's mood changes with the people. She remembers, he says. She's seen it all. Romulus, Caesar, Alaric. You think she gets surprised anymore? You smile, because he's probably right. A few days later, you help a scribe carry salvaged scrolls into a cellar beneath the ruins of a former senator's home. The cellar is cool and dry. He's turned it into a kind of underground library. No system, just piles of knowledge rescued from burned villas and abandoned temples. I don't know if anyone will ever read these again, he tells you, brushing dust from a text on astronomy. But at least they won't be lost. You run your fingers over a scroll of Livy's History of Rome. The words are faded but still legible. Still there, much like the city. You exit into the twilight, where Rome begins to flicker with torchlight and hearth fires. Not the blazing glow of festivals past, but a soft constellation of survival. You follow it home, passing a tavern filled with quiet conversation, a tailor mending a tunic with golden thread, and a stray cat perched like a gargoyle on a cracked statue. Rome is not the Rome of Augustus or Trajan anymore. It's the Rome of the baker, the monk, the child with chalk-stained fingers. A smaller Rome, a quieter Rome, but a living one. You whisper to yourself, not for the first time, still here. And for the first time, it feels like a beginning. By winter, the winds through the streets of Rome carry more than just the chill. They carry memory. Every corner seems to whisper a fragment of the past. You hear the clack of sandals on stone and remember processions of emperors. You glance at the broken steps of the Capitoline Hill and think of Cicero's speeches, echoing into marble. But the present is quieter and colder. You wrap your cloak tighter as you walk past the old theater of Marcellus. Its arches are still grand, but ivy now snakes across them, undisturbed. A group of children plays nearby, pretending to be senators and emperors, building tiny thrones out of broken tiles and shouting declarations into the wind. One of them wears a crown made of laurel leaves and chicken bones. You nod with approval. It's the spirit that matters. You pass a soup line outside a converted temple. The priest stirs a pot of barley and beans, smiling softly at the shivering queue. Charity is Rome now, he says to no one in particular. Someone offers him a cracked plate in thanks. He accepts it like gold. Not far off, a gathering of scribes meets beneath a collapsed portico. They're arguing, not about politics, but about punctuation. One insists Cicero used a double dash. Another says it was a long pause, not a mark. You watch as their fingers trace invisible rules into the air, battling for clarity in a world that no longer insists on it. It's oddly comforting. At the markets, trade has returned in a patchwork way. You see sausages hung beside amphorae of vinegar, spices from the east barely labeled. A man in a cloak barters 2 chickens for a wheel of cheese. The cheese is questionable. The deal is not. You hear rumors again of movement in the north, of Huns, of Vandals, of shifting tides of people pressing against the empire's ragged borders. But here in Rome, the fear has become routine. It's background noise, like the barking of dogs or the clinking of coins. Some people are leaving. You see a family loading their belongings onto a donkey cart. "We're going south," the father says. "Maybe to Carthage, maybe further." He doesn't look sad, just resigned. Others are returning. A young man who fled during the sack has come back to find his family's home reduced to rubble. He sits in the ruins and begins sweeping the floor, despite there being no roof. "You start with the ground," he tells you, "then see what follows." Historians still argue whether this period marked the transition from antiquity to the medieval age. Some call it decline, others transformation. You, standing in the twilight of a fractured city, feel both. There's no grand finale, no fall of the curtain moment, just a slow dissolving and a quiet reassembling. You visit a small chapel built within the shell of an old Roman house. Inside, candles burn beside broken busts. The congregation is small, farmers, children, women who used to be noble. The priest speaks not of power or empire, but of resilience, humility, and the strength to rebuild with empty hands. A young girl sings a hymn in Latin, her voice echoing in the cracked walls. It's off-key, it's perfect. Later that week, you climb the Palatine Hill to look out over the city. The rooftops stretch out in a quilt of stone and clay and smoke. A flock of birds spirals through the sky, as if remembering the shape of the old city. Below, the Tiber glows orange in the low sun. You meet an old man carving a tiny replica of the Colosseum out of olive wood. His hands are gnarled, his eyes sharp. "I like to remember what it looked like," he says, not looking up. "But smaller, less dangerous." You laugh, but not loudly. There's a sense of reverence now, a hush that has settled over everything. The city is full of ghosts, but it is also full of breath, of feet walking uneven paths, of voices that refuse to stay silent, of hands that still shape, even if what they shape is broken. Rome is not what it was, but then again, maybe it never was what it thought it was. Now, in the aftermath, it is something else entirely. Still flawed, still wounded, still beautiful, still here. It's early morning in Rome, and the city stirs not with fanfare, but with the scratch of brooms on stone and the smell of boiling grain. The light creeps softly down the alleyways, touching frescoes too weathered to tell their stories anymore. You find yourself on the edge of the Esquiline Hill, watching smoke curl from a dozen chimneys. A boy chases a chicken into the ruins of a former bathhouse. His laughter bounces off crumbling marble. The chicken is unimpressed. You smile, because in a city haunted by its own greatness, laughter is a kind of rebellion. As you walk, you pass makeshift chapels, rebuilt homes, a cartwheel being hammered back into shape. Everywhere you look, something is either broken or being mended, and in many cases, both. There's no army on the march, no emperor on parade, no banners waving in a triumphant wind. Instead, you see the empire distilled into moments so small they almost go unnoticed. A grandmother weaving cloth on a balcony, a teenager teaching his younger siblings how to write their names in Latin, a baker kneading dough while humming a tune that no one remembers the words to. You cross paths with a former soldier, now stooped and gray, his armor long gone, replaced by a patched wool tunic and the limp of a man who's seen too much. He tells you he once guarded the imperial palace. Now he guards a vineyard. It's quieter, he says, and the grapes don't argue. Historians still debate whether the fall of Rome was truly a fall, or just a long, complicated bow, one that began centuries earlier and ends. Well, that depends on who's telling the story, because even now the story continues. You visit an old woman who has turned her villa into a school. She teaches children using wax tablets and broken bits of pottery. They must learn, she insists, so they'll know how to remember. Remember what, you ask? She pauses. That this wasn't the end. You sit with her for a while, watching the children try to draw the letters R-O-M-A. Some do it backwards. Others embellish with tiny crowns or lions. But the shapes are there. The idea remains. You pass a group of stonemasons repairing a collapsed bridge. One of them grunts. "The empire's gone, But the river's still here, and we still have to cross it. A few streets over, a poet recites verses in exchange for bread crusts. No one really listens, but someone always gives him something. Even the city's animals seem changed. Cats lounge in temple ruins like sleepy guardians of memory. Dogs dig up bones that may be more historic than edible. In a corner of the city, you spot a boy carving the letters SPQR into a plank of wood. Not because he was told to, but because his father used to tell him what it meant. The Senate and the people of Rome. He doesn't really know what the Senate is, but he knows he's still here, and he figures that has to count for something. Later that evening, you stand beneath a fig tree growing from the cracks of an aqueduct. The fruit is small, tart, a reminder that life doesn't need permission from history to go on. You overhear a conversation between two merchants debating whether to move their business to Ravenna. One says Rome is finished, the other shrugs, gestures at the street, the smoke, the sounds, the stubbornness of it all. Finished, he says. Look around. This place refuses to stop. You walk home through the hush of twilight. The city exhales in deep, stone-scented silence. Somewhere a child sings. Somewhere a torch sputters out. Somewhere a father tells his son about Julius Caesar, though the dates are all wrong and the sword sounds more magical than metal. But it doesn't matter, because the story is still being told. Rome isn't glorious now, it isn't feared, it isn't shining from afar, but it is present, breathing, walking, remembering, rebuilding. You pause before your door, looking back once more at the city you've traveled through. The city that has suffered, cracked, bent, yet never fully broken. The empire may crumble, but the city endures. You wake before sunrise, the sky still the color of old parchment. A cool mist clings to the streets of Rome, softening every edge. Crumbling stones, half-fallen columns, broken statues. Even the wounds of the city seem gentler in this light. You step outside and breathe in the silence. It's the kind of silence that only exists between endings and beginnings. You make your way to the Forum one last time. The once bustling heart of the empire now hosts wandering dogs, merchants laying out cloth over marble slabs, and an old man feeding pigeons with bits of barley bread. He hums an old soldier song, off-key but proud. Nearby, a makeshift stage has been set up. A few actors in tattered tunics rehearse a play, something about gods and emperors, though the lines are mostly made up. One actor shouts, "I am Jupiter!" Another responds, "Then why do you owe me 3 chickens?" The others laugh. It's silly. It's exactly what Rome needs. Not everything is performance, though. You spot the bishop of a nearby church helping to dig a trench. Not preaching, digging, sweating, quiet. And when a boy drops his tool, the bishop gently hands it back with a tired smile. Power, it seems, has finally learned how to serve. You take a detour through the Subura, once teeming with noise, now hushed. A few taverns remain open, their shutters hanging crookedly. A woman sells soup made of lentils and goat bone. It tastes better than it sounds. She doesn't charge you. "It's enough that you're still here," she says. You nod. It's a phrase that's come to mean everything. Still here. Historians still argue whether Rome fell in 410 or survived in spirit, whether it was overtaken by Goths, by time, or by its own weight. But walking through these streets, through the laughter, the prayers, the hammering of makeshift repairs, you begin to think maybe Rome didn't fall at all. Maybe it simply shifted. You pass a girl teaching her younger brother how to read using a broken tile and some charcoal. She holds his hand steady, guiding it through each curve of the letters. She whispers, "This is how we keep it alive." You don't interrupt. You just listen. Further along, a mosaic artist is restoring part of a floor in a burned-out temple, not with gold or fine glass, but with pottery shards, brick chips, even colored pebbles. When you ask what she's making, she shrugs. A sun, she says, not because it shines, because it rises. You think about all the people who once ruled this place, emperors in polished sandals, senators in silk, generals in blood-stained cloaks. And now, a baker kneads dough to the rhythm of a psalm. A child recites Virgil to pigeons. A widow plants herbs where a palace used to be. Rome is a city that has been ruled by ambition, but it is now kept alive by care. At sunset, you walk one final circuit of the old city walls. The stones are warm from the day. The view is familiar. Rooftops like a sea of clay and dust, smoke rising in lazy trails, towers leaning a bit more than before. And there in the distance is the Salarian Gate. It has been repaired again. Not perfectly, not grandly, but it stands, just like everything else. And now, let's slow things down. Let the city drift into dusk. Let the bird song soften into whispers. Let the stories of emperors and invasions fall quiet, like dust settling on old scrolls. Let the hum of the Tiber guide your breath, slow and even, like a lullaby woven from time and river. You've walked through fire and ruin, through laughter and silence, through memory and myth. And through it all, Rome has stayed by your side, weathered, worn, wounded, but wondrous still. Let your eyes close now. Let the torchlight flicker gently on the stone walls of your mind. Let your last thought be this: the empire may fade, but Rome endures.